In 1847, a doctor discovered a single, simple habit that could save thousands of lives. He proved it with numbers nobody could argue with. And for telling people about it, his own colleagues had him locked away, where he died from the exact same disease he'd spent his career trying to stop. His name was Ignaz Semmelweis, a young Hungarian physician working at Vienna General Hospital. In 1846, he was assigned to the maternity ward, and almost immediately noticed something disturbing. Women giving birth in his clinic, staffed by doctors and medical students, were dying of a condition called childbed fever at a rate nearly 5 times higher than women giving birth just down the hall in a ward staffed entirely by midwives. Some women were so terrified of being assigned to the doctor's ward that they begged to give birth in the street instead, believing it was safer than the hospital. Semmelweis tested theory after theory: overcrowding, poor ventilation. Even, at one point, the idea that a priest walking through the ward ringing a bell was frightening patients into illness. He eliminated every explanation, one by one, and got nowhere. Then, in 1847, a colleague of his, a pathologist named Jakub Kolečka, was accidentally cut with a scalpel while performing an autopsy. Within days, Kolečka was dead, and his symptoms looked eerily similar to the childbed fever killing new mothers down the hall. Semmelweis made the connection. Doctors and medical students at his hospital routinely performed autopsies on cadavers, then walked directly to the maternity ward to examine living patients, without washing their hands in between. Midwives never touched cadavers at all. Something on the doctor's hands, invisible and unexplained, was being carried from the dead to the living. Semmelweis didn't know about germs. Nobody did yet. But he ordered every doctor and student in his ward to wash their hands in a chlorinated lime solution before touching a patient, strong enough, he reasoned, to strip away any lingering trace of whatever was on their skin. The results were almost immediate. Mortality in his ward dropped from around 18% to under 2%, matching the midwives' ward almost exactly. He had solved it, actually solved it, with nothing but soap and a bucket, years before anyone understood why it worked. And then, almost nobody believed him. His superiors were offended by the implication that they themselves had been killing their patients with their own hands. Prominent doctors across Europe dismissed his findings outright, calling the idea of invisible particles on unwashed hands ridiculous. One editor at a respected Viennese medical journal publicly wrote that it was time to stop entertaining what he called nonsense. Semmelweis grew furious at being ignored while women kept dying from something he knew how to prevent. He wrote increasingly bitter open letters to doctors across Europe, accusing them, in essence, of murdering their own patients through willful ignorance. His tone alienated the very people whose support he needed most. His book on the subject, when he finally published it in 1861, ran over 500 pages and was, by most accounts, nearly unreadable. Over the next several years, Semmelweis's behavior grew more erratic. Historians still debate the cause, some form of mental decline, possibly worsened by the sheer exhaustion of being right and ignored for nearly 2 decades. In 1865, his own family and colleagues arranged to have him committed to an asylum in Vienna, reportedly by tricking him into visiting the institution under a false pretense. When he realized what was happening, Semmelweis tried to leave. He was restrained and beaten by the asylum's guards. 2 weeks later, he was dead at the age of 47. His autopsy revealed the cause: blood poisoning from an infected wound, quite possibly the very injury inflicted during his own beating. The disease that killed him worked through his body almost exactly like the one he'd spent his life trying to stop from killing others. Just a few years after his death, the work of Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister proved that Semmelweis had been right all along. Germs were real. Hand hygiene did save lives. What had once been dismissed as an eccentric obsession became one of the foundational principles of modern medicine. Semmelweis never saw any of it. He died believing he had failed completely. He had the data. He had the results. He had years of proof sitting in his own hospital records. And it still wasn't enough to make anyone listen in time. If you'd been a doctor in that hospital in 1847, watching your own mortality numbers drop to almost nothing, would you have needed to understand why it worked, or would the numbers alone have been enough?